is their camera angles.
There we
You might have to come in just a little more. Their camera angles don't show their actual faces, so I wanted to show you what beautiful paintings we have today. Okay, so we have a lovely model named Monica, and we have a new person behind the switcher with us today, Miss Nora, and we are super excited that she's with us, and she'll probably be joining us for future painting from us later on. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Of course, I'm running behind. I don't even have my paints out or my brushes out, so I'm going to have to take care of that. And I might be disengaging a little bit. The reference images will be up if they aren't yet. Kelly is working on getting them up right now. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right.
The technique, yeah. It does, yes.
All right, everyone, as usual, you're welcome to ask us questions. As part of the reason we do this is so that you feel like you can be a part of the East community at least once a month. And, you know, as our family continues to expand, we love to invite new artists on. So we'll make sure to put up everyone's Instagram tags, but everyone here is local, might have studied elsewhere in different places. Erica studied over in Florence Academy and was an instructor there for several years and has returned back to her hometown. And I think it was originally because of pandemic, right?
Yes,
That you came back?
yes.
Awesome.
And I finished up my year basically there, and then I came back. So.
Perfect.
Erica, how long have you been back? I go back July of 2021.
Okay, cool. All right, so I don't feel quite as guilty for not having finished with that.
No, it's been relatively recent.
It's staticky. Just a little bit. Okay. Chelsea, can you explain to us what tool you're using as you're like holding it up? Can you hold it up against your panel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just using this as a viewfinder. Last time when I was here, I was entirely winging it and like not painting side size and just trying to like intuitively get the measurements. And I realized that was kind of a foolish thing to do while like painting live with these like awesome painters. So I like to use this when painting from life to find the negative space around the model, just to make sure that I'm like keeping all of my measurements accurate that way without having to get super literal and like actually measure exactly what I'm seeing.
Back to your soundboard.
Okay.
Leave this down here in case this is interfering. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for this painting from life. We're dealing with a little bit of sound problem, so we're on it to fix it because we want everybody to hear the answers to questions and to be able to hear the nice conversations that we have going. But for right now, just enjoy watching them do a quick block in of their drawing for the structure of the face. Thank you. But for right now, I'll see how Erica's mic is doing because I think we were having some issues with Chelsea's. But Erica, we have a question that I think that you would have fun answering. So Mateo Diaz asks, my question is during first year training, how long should you be working on bark drawings?
So when I was a first year, I spent not quite all year, but pretty much all year on bar drawings. And so all 3 trimesters. I think the last couple weeks I did a cat's drawing. But now in the curriculum, they don't quite have so many bars. And so it's a little bit more accelerated. I think that the bars are so useful for understanding the language that eventually we'll be using when we work from life. So understanding shadow shapes, edge quality, light shapes, etc. And so, and then doing it in different media, like first in pencil and then charcoal, they're really useful. But at the same time, you don't want to delay too much working from life. So, yes. Oh, is it? Yeah. Can you hear me now? Am I good?
No, you're good.
So Chelsea, what are you thinking about right now as you're doing your drawing for the portrait?
Yeah, so I started my block in making sure that I was basically anchoring my subject at the correct size and the correct location of my canvas. And then kind of as quickly as possible, I wanted to be able to move away from that and start just looking at her and deciding if I was actually like being really thoughtful in terms of what I was seeing and not just kind of mindlessly copying, if that makes sense. So just checking and seeing like, does that actually look right? Like proportionally, does this make sense? So I'm doing that a lot with what I'm putting down. I'm putting in major landmarks, but also trying as much as I can to like kind of zoom out, figuratively speaking, and just make
All right, everybody. Hopefully we're back with your sound. We apologize for that. It took us a second to find the right line issue. We had an issue with one of the mics. So thank you for being patient with us. Also for the camera or the reference images, Kelly is going to be putting them up as soon as she can. She was traveling at the moment. And so we'll be going from there. So thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you in a bit. All right, everybody is able to hear you now. So, Chelsea, how about you tell us a little bit about your approach of how you start a painting, and then after that, Erica, you tell us how you're approaching the beginning of your painting, and do you approach them differently when you're painting not alla prima or in a different way?
Sure. Well, it's out of curiosity, how much of what I have already said actually went through? Because I don't want to be too redundant, but I also don't want to assume everyone heard me.
I think it's a good assumption that whatever you said was not in your most beautiful voice, considering
okay.
that the mics were having a really big problem. So I think people were more distracted by the issue than what you had to say.
Okay.
So for making sure that what you were saying was absolute gold, say
Wonderful.
it again.
All right, I'll get that perfect soundbite for you here. Okay, so what I'm thinking about during this block-in is actually I'm trying to like really push myself with this particular piece, and I'm kind of working on this in general with my work right now. And that is creating something that's really painterly and loose and has a lot of lost edges right from the very beginning, and not getting sucked into painting too tight. This is tough, especially in a block-in. It's very tempting for me to go in and measure everything and get very, very precious about protecting a lot of those nice, beautiful, accurate measurements that we like to get in at the very beginning. So I am trying to get her in, get this drawing accurate, without being too beholden to all the specifics. So you can see I have started playing a little bit with losing some edges off to the left side of her hair. This is great because with my glasses off, that edge is entirely for me. So I'm not getting too tight in some of these. I am letting some go way off of her. And I am trying not to like go back in and tighten that back up. So that is what I am really thinking about. It's basically a constant inner monologue of like, okay, what happens if I try this? Oh, okay. Maybe that didn't go quite as I wanted, but I'm letting myself kind of be curious and ask questions and just see how it goes as much as possible here in this block-in.
For me, I am spending this first session just making sure that I have my overall composition laid out using my big structure lines, making sure I have in general her kind of character from if you were looking really far away that you could recognize her. And then I will refine the drawing a little bit more, but at this stage, it's mostly about getting just her general character on the panel, and thinking a little bit about placement and making sure I have the tilt and other major structural things in place before I get in there. I'm not wanting to refine too much the drawing. I want to keep things flexible at this stage. So I'm just focusing mostly on structure. So I am typically not an alla prima painter. I usually spend multiple layers on a painting, and so I'm treating this more like how I would a color study or something like that. So it'll my approach towards my more finished work changes a little bit, but the kind of structure is the same.
You could just lay a brush on your palette or your panel. So as you can see that Erica's is in focus. It's just right now her brush marks seem very soft. So it looks like
They
it's out
are
of
very,
fo-
yeah,
out of
they're
focus.
super dry.
So,
Yeah.
But I assure you that it is as focused as we can make it here as well. So thanks for checking on that, though. We want to make sure that it's as high quality as we can for everyone.
No, and I do that on purpose because I know I'm going to be painting over it. And so having something more loose, more flexible. I don't use medium at this stage. I keep my paint pretty dry. It allows me to then paint on top of it without any issues.
You know, one thing I always wish that YouTube would let us do is actually put on music, but the algorithm doesn't allow us to do that because of copyright issues.
Oh.
Isn't that sad? So we'd have some beautiful classical music going on in the background, but if we were capable of it.
I usually paint with music. I find it helpful to have something going on so I'm not overthinking.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Erica, since you are mixing things up, I suppose, what is some of your like self-talk, or are you trying not to have self-talk when you're working on Prima?
I'll say I am trying to basically combine my drawing, like my self-talk was mostly drawing related of like, making sure you're getting things in the right place and having your marks mean something without getting too fussy. But I also do want to be a little bit more maybe intuitive at the same time. So I don't want to overthink it and try to force something that's not working.
So, what music are you guys listening to like right now? Is not like in your head right now, but as you guys are doing your work in your studios, like what's the music that you're interested in?
You can go ahead first.
It is typically not classical, just because I've been in enough studios where like that is the music of choice. So I feel like I typically rebel against that, but it'll sometimes be dance music if I think I can trust myself to continue to focus. Sometimes I feel like I need to move in order to think. But other times I will totally throw the idea of music out the window and like listen to a podcast or an audiobook. What about you, Erica?
I find it just depends on what I need that day. So for days where I need to focus more, it might be classical. And then other days, if I need some energy, it might be like pop music or something. So,
Yeah.
it just depends. But my taste tends to just go all over the place. So it might mix up
I feel that.
genre-wise.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick model break, let the model stretch her neck. And so we're going to put you on mute. We're going to work on a few things with the mic to make sure that we can get rid of all the little staticky things that are going on. So we're going to put you on mute for a second while we work on that. And we will be back in about 5 or 6 minutes. Time I'm going to try to attempt to paint today. We'll see how it goes. My first and foremost priority is to make sure that y'all's live stream is staying up and running. So while we have two of our guest painters, I will just be sort of a secondary we're here in the background. But anyway, what were we talking about? Favorite music? Is that what it was? Erica, what do you like to listen to?
She already answered that
Oh.
question. I think you're up.
No, no. All right, so I'm really funny when it comes to my music, because it just obviously depends on my mood, and I think that's kind of goes for everybody. But something that I find that I actually paint really well and stay at the easel the longest, which for me, that's what it's about. It's to help me kind of focus and stay at the easel, whatever I can do to do that, you know. Believe it or not, I discovered that I really like Irish pub music.
That's great.
And
That's cool.
and so that's like what I listen to a lot. I just like have several Spotify channels where I'm listening to sort of Irish pub music. And funny enough, I have now a mentee who, Evie Herb, who lives in Durham. Shout out to Evie if she's watching. And she was over here a few weekends ago, kind of getting a tour of the place. And we were talking, and she had mentioned that her boyfriend was a musician. And I was like, oh, what kind of genre of music? And she said, oh, he's sort of folk, Irish pub punk. And I was like, what? That's awesome. So so for the past like week, I've been like listening to their music as well.
Nice.
Which has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the reasons why I typically like struggle listening to classical. There are certain classical songs where like, I shouldn't say songs. I remember having an instructor once who were like, songs are sung. These are pieces of music.
That's awesome.
But some of them I like have a history of being able to play them, and I will start to think about playing them, which isn't really the headspace I want. But others, I will find myself getting a little bit, like I feel myself getting bored or just not having the attention span that I want. So
Mm.
and yeah, I think the real litmus test is like how long are you staying at the easel while obviously like taking breaks when you need them and staying fresh.
It's also that interesting balance of listening to the music and finding it interesting, but not being so into it that you're not
Yeah.
focusing on your painting. You're just into
Exactly.
the music. So
Totally get that.
I have a question. Do you guys have any tips for dealing with like the physical fatigue that comes with standing at the easel for however many, like 8 hours when you're working?
I'm eager to hear the answer to this question too, because I sit.
yoga.
Yoga, that's actually a really good one. I think that actually really would help a lot. I need to do more yoga. The funny thing is, when I was first starting at GCA, before I went to GCA, I sat all the time when I painted. And when I got to GCA, you have to stand while you're drawing. And I remember the first day I wore flip-flops. And that was a really bad day. My lower back felt like it was about to break. And for the next like 4 or 5 days, it was the same. Like I had like the worst lower back pains ever. And then after that, all of a sudden it started getting better and better. And there was a point at which I started stretching as well, and stretching my hamstrings especially. And honestly, it was just kind of trial by fire. And after a while, your body gets really used to it, and your posture readjusts. So that I think that was the biggest thing for me, is that I just had to readjust my posture from being sort of hunched over. So, but I bet you don't have that problem, Chelsea, because aren't you you're an equestrian rider? Correct?
Yes, and I have a dance background. Erica, you look like you have a dance background
I was a
too.
figure skater. so
Okay, yep.
there-
That being said, I do like wonder how
Mhm.
much like the shoes I am wearing right now, for the sake of looking kind of cute to be on camera, are a mistake. Because I get like a lot of low back pain from standing, and I think one thing I am actually like actively working on is like talking to PTs about like just analyzing my posture and figuring out like where my muscle imbalances are, and trying to like engage my muscles a little bit differently. So actually there's like a big difference between standing to paint with you all today versus last time I was here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so like hopefully I can kind of get that under control, because yeah, it's really hard to remind yourself to back up and make really smart choices when you're sitting. It's just super difficult.
Yeah. I can see that.
Louis, can you explain a little bit of what you're doing right now with your brush and holding it up?
Yeah. So when I'm holding it up, I'm checking sort of tilts and angles just as sort of an envelope way of seeing where I want to place the model onto my panel. So it really has less to do with proportion at the moment, and it has more to do with how big is her sort of face going to be in relationship to the panel, and then on top of that, just using sort of an envelope, which I mean by envelope is just an all-encompassing angle to kind of say, okay, at the furthest out, this is how far that should possibly go. And then from there, I start making a few more accuracy decisions. But it's kind of good for me to like figure out like what's the tilt angle of her jawline and her hair, and where do I want it to hit onto the canvas, that kind of thing. So, but good question. Because if I don't like it at this stage, I haven't invested a lot, you know, and I can kind of just go back and change things a bit. The other thing is I've noticed over time is when you have a model, there's a pose that you set them in, and then there's like a muscle memory pose that they find themselves resting in over time. And so I don't like to commit a whole lot, because over time there's this like perfect little shift that they get in, that they stay in like for the duration of the session. And so I kind of like allow that to have space. And, you know, by doing it this way, it helps me kind of not be committed to anything that fast.
I feel like I just saw you make Monica adjust.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like I saw her like relax as you were saying.
You did. You're doing
fine.
great.
You're great.
You're doing fantastic. Yeah. This has nothing to do with. This is just a normal, natural state of working from life. So you're doing. I tell you, Monica's never done this before, and she's doing a fantastic job.
So we have a couple comments from Stephanie about our conversation on music and focusing. And she said, Tellman was always good for the architectural drafting / drawing studio, like the Mozart effect for elementary students, but for grownups. And she says, 40 hertz aligns pure gamma and focuses concentration. I feel like you would know a little bit about that, Louis.
You know, you definitely heard me kind of go, Yeah. I've heard about those things, but I find it fascinating. However, I actually don't know that much. But now that like she said it, like my wheels are already turning, and I'm ready to go start like looking stuff up. So, which is very common for me.
Okay, so we have a question from Mateo Diaz. For someone who may have limited access to live models, do you think that practicing from photo references will help me get to a professional level?
You know, there's part of me that says that, you know, it's like an attorney, you know, that depends, you know, because there's so many like factors and scenarios to it. It depends on how you learn. One of the things I would say is absolutely you can get to a certain level working from photo. In fact, you know, most of us are forced to work from photo because of just the nature of how expensive models can be over time, especially if we're working on something that's quite involved. What I would say though is, if one thing you get from life that you can't get from photo is that you have binocular vision, which your mind computes to making a statement about how you see depth in 3 dimensions. And what you do in painting is you try to create, well, if you're a realist painter, it doesn't necessarily mean all painters, but if you're a realist painter, what you're trying to do is create an illusion of depth and a sense of depth. And it helps to be able to see things in sort of a 3-dimensional format to help you understand how to paint an illusion of depth in painting. Doesn't mean you need it, but it does help you get to a certain level of realism if that's something that you're wanting to achieve. So it's kind of like life helps even when you're working from photo over time, which is, I've found to be one of the better things that I've ever done was force myself to work from life.
I think it's not something that, for example, you have to always do portraits from life, like anything from life, any object from life that you can set up, because it's helping you not copy something, but understand it, interpret it. And if you're working from life and, light is changing a little bit, or, the color of the pear is shifting over time, it's really helpful to be able to understand structurally what's happening. And then that way, if you do work from a photograph, you're not just copying it because it's there, like you're thinking about it and engaging with your subject. So that's something that working from life can really helps with.
I think the only thing I typically would add to that would be that I think for some artists who are like earlier on in their journey, I sometimes say, if you would bring a model into the studio and panic and like you wouldn't be making good decisions, absolutely back off and set yourself up to be able to paint in a way that you are going to be a little bit more thoughtful and focused on. And you can absolutely build up to the point where you might be bringing a model in. But I do like the caveat of you can absolutely work from life without it being portraiture. And I think that's something that's obviously good for everybody, regardless of focus, so long as their interest is realism.
Along those lines, I was recently reading an article, I think by some man named Mark, and I want to say his name is Walker, but it's on the Art Renewal Center's website on Bouguereau's process. And he was talking about how he was finding these quotes by people who had watched Bouguereau work, and Bouguereau would bring models into his studio, and when he was doing little chubby cherubs, he'd have little babies rolling around. And usually the kids were moving around so much that he could use them for color, but not for form. So what he'd do then is he'd go to museums near him and look at sculptures. And from what I've seen from his studio, from pictures, he had a lot of plaster casts of different anatomical features to inform his work. Because when you're painting little kids, I know that Louis knows this, but they move a lot.
Oh yeah. Yeah, children, I think that it's one of the more underrated things in painting. It's because, it feels cliche to do a portrait of a child, but it is by far, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to do, because they move, they're all over the place. They have really soft, sort of supple skin that is, you can't anchor yourself on some part of them that shows sort of the history on their face, the age on their face, which makes it, quite difficult sometimes as well. And And so to find like transitions in anatomy and make it feel solid it can be quite a challenge. So yes, absolutely. I find that super interesting though, that he would go, I didn't know that he would go and like look at sculptures at museums, to capture form, which is really, what a great idea, makes me kind of wonder, well, what did the sculptors use?
Yeah, I had the same thought.
So, that's super cool.
I really want to ask you about your process for painting children, because I imagine you can't do all of it from life, but you
Mhm.
probably aren't doing all of it from a photo either.
So if I head and shoulders pieces, I actually do from life and have them sit, and I'll have them watch a movie,
Mhm.
and I'll set up like a laptop or something and give them Bluetooth headphones. And the thing I love about them watching a movie, everyone thinks that they get like the deadpan stare, but it's actually not true. Their emotions carry over from whatever is happening in the movie. So if it's a scary moment, you see a little bit of fear in their eyes. If it's a happy moment, you see a bit of joy in their eyes. And so you kind of like go and like wait for what, try to capture a certain look, and you're like, oh, that's really beautiful. That kind of like adds a lot of identity to who they are. And that's where I find the poetry in painting, and painting kids, honestly. So that's like a bit of a trick. But the other thing is, what we do before we start the life pose is I actually do a whole photo shoot, and we set the pose involving the family. So whoever the client is, I involve them on setting the pose. And I'll tell them why I think this one's good or that one's good. But I also like them to have some sort of involvement, because I'll say, here's my top 5 favorite, like more poetic poses. And then they can go, oh, that's so her or him because of what he's doing right there. They get to have input on sort of the identity and the poetry of the piece too. And that's actually quite helpful. And I really love. So, yeah, that's a bit of my process. Oh, so when I have the photo, it helps me set the pose back. And it also, if they are moving around like crazy, I still can see their dimension in front of me and their color. So, but I'll have the photo to kind of like help with the drawing in places if I need it. And that's kind of how I've approached it. And it's worked really well. I've done probably 20, 25 in this new process, over the past couple of years. So.
Do you typically do it over the course of one movie, or does it kind of just depend on what you need?
Oh yeah, no, we go through multiple movies. I mean, it's 3 hours. So you go, I can't tell you how many times I've heard Frozen. But yeah, no, usually it's several movies, and it is a course of 3 days. So it'll be 3 hours at a time. And depending on how antsy they are, it might be a 5-minute on and 15-minute off.
Yeah.
Or it might be 15-minute on and 5-minute off. There's some times where I'm like, hey, you want to take a break? And they're like really involved in the movie. And they're like, can I just keep sitting here? yeah, absolutely. And their muscles are made of rubber bands. So like they could hold the pose and not get stiff for an hour and be fine, whereas you give me 15 minutes and I'm dying.
Yeah.
So
I will really enjoy looking at your portraits in the future and just thinking about the fact that you were listening to Frozen as you created
let it go. It's helped me so many times in frustration, just being like, let it go, let it go. Just let the painting go.
So our friend Stephanie, who commented on the music and on Hertz and stuff, she's been posting some really interesting commentary in our chat. So she said plaster casts are better than photo references. Photos by their very nature flatten form. And she said Rodin was nearly blind, but sculpted by touching his models to discover their forms. Isn't that interesting? And And then she said, I think when Erica was talking about painting pears and working from life and having things change, she said a pear sitting on a white surface sharply highlighted on one side will give you basic shapes and shadows to build basic skills, which I agree with. So thanks, Stephanie, for commenting on all of that.
All right,
The way
everybody.
that-
Well, we're going to take a quick break. Hold that thought, Erica, for the next time around. We definitely want to hear from you. So we're going to go ahead and give the model a break for a moment, and we will be back shortly.
You're doing great, by the way.
Yeah.
True.
I'm going to continue some of the conversation that we had earlier on like painting pears and Bouguereau and all these really interesting subjects. So I think Erica had some stuff that she wanted to say.
Just that pears are useful to paint because the way the skin reacts to light, or the skin of the pear, it looks like skin, like the way the highlights and lights and you know,
Yeah.
everything. It's kind of similar to how light on the skin would behave. So if you're can't paint from life, can't paint a person, but you're trying to build some skills, they're really useful to do.
I remember hearing that that's why Jennifer Gennari has her series on hairless cats. She like wanted to practice
really?
painting skin, but like
No
didn't
kidding.
necessarily have like easy access to a model.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she's like, all right, I'll do some hairless cats, and then she has this beautiful series of them.
Well, way to go, Jen Gennari. Shout out to you. Yeah, that's awesome. What a great way. I know that Alex also has said that the reason he loves painting peaches is because this color of the peach helps you kind of better understand color that is similar to skin tones in the color aspect. So what I'm hearing is we just need to have a skin cat with some peaches and
Got a
pears,
skin cat.
and we will have the whole thing. Not a skinned cat, but a
Right.
skin cat. So
Thanks, I hate it.
because I don't know the name of those cats. What are they called again?
I mean, I think we can call them hairless cats.
No, we call them skin cats. Skin cats, way better. Way better. You know, not to get confused with
Okay.
skinny cats or skinned cats.
Right.
But that's what
Very
we're going with,
important.
everybody.
Yeah.
We're going with skin cat.
Okay.
Now we're going to get, I guarantee you someone's going to comment and tell us what kind of species
Yeah.
of cat that is.
Well, I think
Um,
there's like several different kinds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think. Someone please validate that.
All right, now this is good, gets to the point of the painting where I go, all right, I'm just avoiding the actual thing. I'm
Oh,
sitting here
yeah.
painting
That's-
around.
That's the great part of the
You know.
painting.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're like, oh, I'll just paint everything but the portrait.
Yeah.
But no, I'm going in to the hair.
That's what I'm doing.
Exactly.
So we were talking about Bouguereau earlier during the break, and Lewis stopped me from telling a story. So I could tell it
That's
on
a good
here.
story. Yeah.
Which is we were talking about people who have like really awesome painting collections. And I was like, oh, when you last talked to Scott and Sue, Scott Burdick and Susan Lyon, did they tell you about the like accidental Bouguereau that they have in their collection? Where I think it was maybe an art appraiser who approached them and said, we have this piece, we think it's from one of Bouguereau's students. Are you interested in picking this painting up? And naturally, they said yes.
Think about it, thought about it, yes.
And added it to the collection, and like later had it authenticated, I guess is the term you would use. And it was determined that it was actually a Bouguereau original and not
Wow.
one of his students.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, next time you visit them,
I need to go. I actually have never visited their house, which really need to go do that. I love them. They're just like, their art culture, salt of the earth, in my opinion. They're, you know, they contribute so much to the artist community and are just so giving. Yeah, they're up there, the top sort of top faves of people I know.
We're so lucky to have like so many great people here.
I tell you, North Carolina, it's really becoming an artist hub, in my opinion. You start seeing more and more moving here, but then you start discovering awesome people like you guys, you ladies, and you know, we've got Carmen Gordon here, and then Alex and Divya are here, and you know, Caroline's now here. So hopefully we just keep on drawing them in.
All right, now's the place where I really like how light the value of this shadow is. And the question is, do I go put black on it? Because that is her hair color. Danger.
So our friend Stephanie, who is knowledgeable on things from music to pears, she commented on our cat conversation and said, so I think that she's saying that there are 3 different types of hairless cats, Donskoy and Peterbald, and she said it's the Sphinx that's really creepy.
Yeah.
I just always think of this is going to show my age, but back when Friends was on, and they had like the creepy,
Yeah.
you know, cat on there, and that like it just happened to be an angry cat. So they're passing it along to, you know, it's like, well, you know, you take care of it, you take care of it.
Okay, so we have a question from Lisa Zakur. Aside from commissions, how do you rate in importance exact likeness as opposed to interpretation of the model?
Ooh, that's a good question. Chelsea, how about you go first?
Oh man. All right. I'm very curious how much this answer deviates from what everyone else will share, but I really like doing this for that exact reason, that I can think a little bit more about creating an image that I like and what that means instead of tensing up and worrying about like really copying that likeness, you know, pixel for pixel, so to speak. I think especially when coming off of commission work where I think for me, it's very easy to tighten up much more than I want to. So this is a really nice break from that. So I'm curious if I'm the outlier there. I think I easily could be.
So I actually, I'm not one to like, I have an issue. I think it's just that it might be the German in me that is, you know, really loves to focus on details. And so like, because of that reason, everything is a practice on likeness because it is just one of the things that fascinates me. However, I talk often up to Divya and Alex and all the people that are here that you have to ask yourself when you're working on a piece that's more of a poetic piece, do you want this to be about likeness? Because you can make it, you know, you're adding another factor to making it, you know, another factor to your poetry. It's like adding, you know, percussion to your orchestra of violins. If you're wanting it to have likeness and the other things, it's harder to even balance even more to keep it poetic and to have the likeness perfect. But you most certainly don't have to. And, you know, think that it is very valid to make work that is just poetic and not have to be about the likeness. Because honestly, sometimes it's easier to be able to be creative and push things in emotion and in gesture when you don't have to think about the fact that it has to be this identity of this person. So, but for me, it's very important, and it's hard for me to get out of the mindset of it being a likeness thing.
What do you think about that, Erica?
I think what comes to mind is it just depends on what story you want to tell. And that will, I think, help you prioritize what information you want to put in. And so, it reminds me of, there's the portraits of Isabella Stewart Gardner. There's a Sargent portrait, and then there's a Zorn portrait. And the Zorn one is done like really quickly, and it's like her coming into a room after like fireworks or something, versus the more composed version that Sargent did. And it tells two different stories. And so you could maybe say, well, the Sargent one is perhaps more finished, relatively speaking, to the Zorn sketch. And so, but at the same time, like the Zorn one has this energetic feel that, you can argue, is it more accurate to her personality? It just depends.
As an aside, whenever I struggle with capturing the likeness, I'm just going to call the piece poetic. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Exactly. You definitely can say, oh, well, this is the direction we're going with it now. Honestly, though, there's happy accidents that happen in that, I always tell people, push yourself to the point of failure, because you never know where your next discovery is going to be, and often it is in failure. Is truly the ingredient to success. Philosophically.
I think we were talking about this last time about being comfortable with failure and messing up, and it's so important.
Yep, really is.
Like when you fall to get up.
Yep.
So along the lines of like poetry and painting exact likeness and exactly what you see versus doing a little bit of inventing, are there any painting conventions that you guys hold to, like that foreheads are a little bit more yellow and then cheeks are a little bit more ruddy, and I think that usually chins are a little bit more neutral or greenish?
I think I tend to think about this from the opposite direction of like, be careful putting hard lines in certain places. Be careful putting like cool tones in like a woman's jawline. Like, not so much to go into like, don't think about pink elephants, but I think I try and see what's there as much as possible, but make sure that I'm staying away from certain things that I know might be unflattering when you translate the model into paint.
I mean, that's a really good way of putting it. It's sometimes it's not about the convention of putting something there, but the convention of making sure that you're not doing a pitfall.
Yeah.
And that's a really great way of putting it. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I like to think about it as, the conventions aren't there so you can copy them. They're there to help you observe. And, that way, for example, there's a reason why cheeks tend to be more red and foreheads aren't, like in terms of blood flow and capillaries and stuff like that. So sometimes those things can help you observe, but it's not that it's a rule. It's just, it's more just some guidance to help you see.
I think that actually really articulates beautifully like why I will sometimes like warn students away from thinking in those terms, because I think sometimes when we think about rules, we stop observing if we aren't thinking of those rules as they were intended.
Yeah, that's a good point. You heard it here, folks. East Oak Studio. But things that it's interesting also, because then you can select things that you do like, though, also to say this is just part of the identity of how I paint, and you subconsciously do that. You don't have to make a conscious decision. Sometimes it's a conscious decision, but you'll find tendencies and things that you like to do, and nothing at all wrong with that. Just an an observation that it is the tendencies that we happen to lean towards that creates identity in our work, good or bad.
So, Erica, I noticed that a little bit earlier, you were doing more mixing on your palette than you were painting. Can you explain like what you were thinking about? Maybe hold your palette up in front of the camera so we could see a little bit of your piles. Can you? Oh, your head's a little bit in the way. Good, that's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about like what you were thinking about when you were doing that?
Sure, and I'll do this maybe so you can see some of the.
You're good, y'all.
Okay, so I'm going from dark to light, and I started with my darks because they're just visually easier to latch onto. And I'm trying not to go to just pure black because I find having a little vibration in the color is helpful for it to feel like it's still vibrant even in the darks. And I have a general, I have a general red string and then a general more yellow string. I know I flipped them, but it's generally how it works. And then I'll have some bluer, like basically pure blue. Sorry, not pure blue. Almost like a blue string, because I know I tend to go a little bit too hot when making skin tones. So it's a flexible pot. Like I'm not going to stick to these premixes, but I find it easier when I'm to just premix my palette as well as I can. And then as I'm painting, and I made little notes here to make sure that the skin tones and values are working with each other. And then as I continue painting, I'll adjust to have it, if something's too red or too yellow or too whatever, then I'll adjust it accordingly. So they're pre-mixed piles with flexibility. In general, I go warm, cool. So warm shadows, cooler midtones, warmer lights, cooler highlights. That's a general kind of schematic that I follow, but at the same time, just like we were saying with conventions, like they're there to help you observe. That doesn't necessarily mean that like the light on the face is pure orange and the shadows are red and midtones are blue. Like you don't have to go that extreme. It's just help you see the relationships a little bit better. I'm someone who I get really into color and I see all of them and I want to put them all in. So helping rein that in a little bit is useful, or at least give it some, a direction is useful.
I relate to that.
But I find it useful to just take a session, spend time on your premixtures, making sure that you like where it's going, and focusing on that. I think that's not wasted time at all.
No, not at all. Helps set you up.
Absolutely. And I'm painting dry, so I can paint over what I've already put down pretty easily without it feeling like too slippery.
Thanks, Erica. You have a fan. Somebody here said, a commenter said that you're a great teacher. And we have another question from Mateo. He asks, and I guess anybody can answer this, do you think copying Prud'hon drawings are too advanced for first-year atelier students?
My instinct is to say go for it.
Yeah.
If you like something, I think you should try it. And you can always do it again and learn from that experience.
Mm-hmm. I don't think you're ever too not advanced to learn something from an experience, The interesting thing is like when I'm teaching workshops, I tell people a lot that I'm going to say a lot, but don't worry about 90% of what I say. Find the one thing that was incredibly helpful for you that I said that rang a bell because everyone's cultivated themselves to a certain degree of where they are in their artist journey. And that later on, when you've learned more, other things that I say will make a lot more sense. And it'll be a new aha moment, even though like you've heard the whole lecture before. You've now prepared yourself and gotten yourself to a level that where that actual thing makes sense later on. So in that light, I think that it's good to know that you can learn from any circumstance. Just making sure that you're doing intentional practice is going to be what helps you learn faster or slower, you know. Oh, that session went pretty
Oh my
quick.
God.
All right, everybody, we'll be back here in about 5 minutes, and we'll see you then. Of this, we were talking on break that Jeffrey Mims was so graciously allowing us to have. He is sort of taking a break from teaching, and so he has given us one of his study skeletons that happens to be a real one. And we're so excited about it that we're going to have like a respectful ceremony of like assembling it and putting it up here in the studio, not to freak anyone out that might be on YouTube, but we're also going to work on coming up with a name. So the non-real skeleton we have here, his name is Rattles. So
I think we need a more respectful
that.
name
oh,
than that.
oh,
We
of
can-
course, he's a non-human
Yeah.
skeleton, you know, but they actually had a name for him, or I think it's a him, Mr. Bones.
Mhm.
So we'll you know, people out there can give suggestions if they want. But we're super excited and honored to have, as you know, once he was called Mr. Bones, and appreciate whoever was willing to give up their body for research. So
One of my like college, I don't know, misadventures maybe, was that for artistic purposes, I was like, yeah, I'll take anatomy lab.
I thought you were about to be like, yeah, we went out to the graveyard,
Oh
exhumed the
man,
body.
no, my college experience was very tame. But yeah, all I wanted to do was learn like major muscles and bones, not like what the insertion and attachment point for every single muscle is and like what nerves innervate everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, it wasn't my best grade in college, but cadaver lab was that was an experience.
Yeah. My brother, who's a physician, he talks about it all the time. That they just had to like burn their scrubs afterwards because they
Yeah.
smelled so bad.
Yeah, I couldn't eat meat for a long time afterward.
Oh, I'm
actually,
sure.
yeah,
I am sure.
but was really grateful that people let us have that opportunity.
Yeah, all of my let's see, not all of them. I think 3 of my grandparents gave them their bodies up for research,
Oh wow.
and my uncle did as well. So I tell you, it's for a great cause. It's cool because it's kind of like you're continuing a legacy well past your time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So someone had asked earlier about whether a certain master copy exercise would be like too much for a first year atelier student. And we were talking about it a little bit during the break. And I wanted to like jump into that conversation just to add that I think the only really important thing to keep in mind while you do things like that is just being aware of your own mindset while you do those kinds of exercises and making sure that like it doesn't become discouraging. And I think that the threshold of what that is varies from person to person and day to day. So you could have something that's like really challenging and exciting and puts you in this like really great place. And then there are certain exercises or certain days where like, oof, that is just not the way it's going to work out. And I think it's important to just be mindful of that and, you know, respect it, and not take that personally if ever it's like, man, I've been working on this thing for a month and I feel like I'll never finish. I don't think that necessarily helps us. I mean, I guess sometimes it could, but like in general.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. And like I said before, you know, there's always a moment, there's always maybe a scenario where that's not true or that it is true, and that it always just depends on what kind of person you are. And, you know, a good assessment is what she's saying, which is just recognize that there are people out there and there are things that can be daunting, and that we're not logical beings. We're, you know, capable of emotion. We're emotional beings capable of logic. And so many times it's about knowing one's self. And that goes with everything. I mean, that goes with finance, you know, that goes with how you approach life and discipline and all sorts of things. But most certainly, it carries over into painting, and knowing yourself and what is your good tendencies and what can be harmful is really good.
Yeah. One of the things I like telling my students is like, I could give you the best painting advice in the world, and it does not matter if you aren't excited to actually get in the studio and apply it.
So we have a good question from Lisa. She asks, can you speak to paint application a bit in regard to applying gradations without blending?
I would say if you I mean, here, you can see my brushes.
Yes, bring your highest brush is not in the shot.
Oh, that's okay.
But yes.
So I generally have a different brush per value. And that's helping me, and even though I may not be doing it all the time, but it's helping me have a cleaner paint application. So that way each, you know, I'm painting wet into wet and I'm going from dark to light. And then I'm not really blending in between my strokes. And so I know I'm going slow, but it will, it will come together one bit at a time. And I'm just thinking about kind of building the form almost from like back to front, you could say, because it's like, you know, what's turning away from us and then what's coming towards us. Like I'm, you know, it's coming up in light and I'm building the form that way. So that's how I would think about it.
The other thing to consider is that your palette is where you're blending, and then you apply. So you blend down here, at least that's how in my process of painting, I have a light value to a dark value. And then I kind of move up and down that scale, if you're thinking musically, on blending on here. You know, now that's great with a palette knife. You can do it with a palette knife, especially if you're applying thick paint. So during the break, I used a palette knife to pre-mix a few things. And then when I'm applying, you're sort of applying a fresh note, and then that helps. Now, in Alla Prima, of course, there's a certain stage at which you switch to blending. Doesn't have to be. It's just the way I approach my Alla Prima. So, and there's a lot of ways, a lot of roads to roam here for this. But yeah. Chelsea, you have thoughts?
I think you all nailed it, because as soon as that question came in, I like the only thing that came into my head was like mix the intermediary color.
Yeah.
I was like, well, that's a very simple answer. So
Also, Erica's way is a great way, but it doesn't also necessarily mean you have to start that way. Sargent was known to always start with the midtone and then go light and then dark. And then I have started this by doing a dark note, light, and then kind of going in between to find mid. So there's a lot of room for experimentation if you want to experiment on that.
I find them like in between where I don't purely go from dark to light. You can see like in her face, for example, I'm not going as dark as what's on the model to give me a little bit of room, a little bit of flexibility. And so it's interesting just learning different methods and just taking a little bit of different ones and kind of creating your own process. I just think that's
Absolutely
an interesting development over time.
yeah, I always love hearing from various artists, like how they like solving those problems. Like I know a painter who works, like he'll start with the midtone and then he puts in the lights. And I'm like, that would never work for the way that I paint. And so I find it fascinating.
Oh yeah. Yeah, my thought process is I want to know my range of dark and I want to know my range of light, then paint it that way. And then like Erica, I'm very similar in the sense that I will paint not too dark and I will paint not too light. And then like that gives me room for highlight and pushing things brighter. And the same with dark, especially in the dark. The light is like, it's so easy to lose your light. So like sometimes I'll key it pretty high so that I have range to blend into it. But this medium is such a forgiving medium that like there's opportunity to push things around.
I like, one reason I pre-mix my palette is that I like to know that range. And I mix up my highlights too, just so I know this is as bright as I can go. And then, when I was doing the from my point of view, the left side of her face, it seemed a bit bright. But then I saw what it was on my palette. I'm like, okay, I'll just keep trusting and keep going rather than lightening that up. I'm going to wait for the whole context and then make some adjustments.
I mean, boy, did you say a good, just sage advice right there, that trust your palette. The context on your panel sometimes just not there yet. And so your palette actually sometimes has a better understanding of what colors are in relationship to the other colors you're making. And when you put it up there, sometimes you won't even know the difference. You'll be like, whoa, this is so wrong. But wait till you get all the context up there before you start making decisions to change something.
Absolutely. And then also remembering with color, it always is in relationship to something else.
Yep.
So, something might look a little weird when you first put it on, but then once you keep going with it, maybe it'll, fix itself as you keep going. And then once you have your full context, you can make a better judgment about whether you need to make any changes.
What does your workday look like, and what art habits do you add to your day that help you improve painting?
Who wants to go first?
I feel like my schedule is a little bit unusual just because there's a lot of teaching in it. So I'm actually like really curious to hear your answers to that.
Well, I actually think this is really good and healthy, because you'll find out that like not every day for me, especially since I run East Oaks Studio, is a painting day as much as I wish it was. But my work days typically are early in the morning. I get up and I'll either read or do some sort of exercise, and typically watch the news and get on the phone. Not all my morning habits are healthy.
Like watching the news.
Yes. Watching the news, I don't necessarily think is a place of health.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So, but it is what I do. So I'm going to be honest about what I do.
Yeah.
And so, but that's, if I'm working out, that's the time I do it. And, you know, typically my goal, if I'm doing a good day, on a good day, is that I want to do anything that requires discipline in the morning, because my discipline muscle is the strongest. I then, in turn, later in the day, do the things that are fun, that require less discipline, because I find that while my willpower muscle starts going down, you know, that it kind of is balanced by the thing that I want to do. So during the day, I typically, if I'm painting, I start my painting day at usually 8 to 9 in the morning. And if I'm not painting, usually on Mondays, is a full admin day, and I usually am working on everything that has to do with administrative things. So, you know, and that's where also we have an assistant who like is basically chief of sort of operations with East Oaks, and that's when we meet and go over lots of things, is at that same time period. And then Tuesdays, I'm online helping, you know, twice a month, I'm doing critiques. And so on East Oaks Studios website, I do open critique day, and you can submit your work, and I do a whole like hour and a half time period of going over people's work and how they can improve it. And all you have to do is be a subscriber to East Oaks to get that that critique. And then that is also the day I do my mentees and mentorships. So I do a Zoom period with mentees and go over their work as well, but that's usually an hour and a half, 2 hours for every individual. And so my entire Tuesday is devoted to that. So that's pretty much how I kind of spread things out on my end.
How would you rate your fun activities versus your I have to get this done activities? Like, because I noticed you put painting first thing in the morning.
Well, no, it's not first thing in the morning.
Okay.
Painting starts at, unless you consider not 8 or 9 first thing.
So for me.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense now.
So first thing in the morning is typically 4:30 or 5 in the morning.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So I'm kind of an early bird. We were talking about this before you got here, that I've got farmer's blood. I grew up on a farm, and you started your day, you woke up at 4:30 every morning to start your day.
I'm envious.
So that being said, yes, that's usually when fun time starts, is 9.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
So, but typically if there's emails to get to, I do those before I start painting.
Mhm.
Because I also don't like my painting day to be interrupted once it's started.
Erica, what about you?
Sorry, I just put a mark on the eye and I don't want it to be there like that. So hold up. So my typical day, I think, depends on what I'm painting. So in general, like I have, I might wake up. One thing I have added to my routine is doing a bit of yoga in the morning. I find that
amazing.
my shoulders hurt less when I'm painting if I do that. And I usually spend the morning prepping things or doing a first layer on something, so that way when I eat lunch, it can dry a little bit and then I can work on top of it. So I try to kind of adapt what I'm doing that day based off of what I'm painting. And then I work from natural light, so my day will correspond with what's happening in the sky. And so I mean, that's pretty much it, but I'm working on my routine and figuring out how to, what to balance. Because when I was in school, you had a very rigid routine of, you had your morning session, you had your afternoon session, evening drawing, and then you had to figure out how to fill your life in, which was great for that time. But now it's like there's more to just doing that, and so in painting doesn't always work with the kind of rigidity of the schedule that I would like it, but it's a process.
Always is a process, that's for sure.
I think flexibility is really important. So if, one thing that's nice about setting your own schedule is that if you need to shift it, you can.
Yep. Knowing oneself too, what is your optimal time? What is your peak hours for getting things done? And what does efficiency look like for you? Because there's days you don't want to do it. Even if your job was to sleep, there would be days you were like, yeah, I just really don't want to sleep.
Yeah, I was wondering what everyone's thoughts were on like having your painting day and saying like, I'm going to paint for 8 hours today, but is 8 hours really that productive for you? Or is it more like, do you find that you can get, be more concentrated and make more of an effort in 4 hours? Like what does that looked like to you guys?
I'm glad you asked that because this is actually a question I asked Susan Lyon in a workshop. And she told me a story from painting with Richard Schmid, which was that basically, long story short, like the maximum even for like Richard Schmid was maybe 5 hours, after which he would get diminishing returns. So I never had the expectation that I would have a full 8-hour day of painting. And I schedule around that as a result.
Yeah. Last time she was here, she said the same thing. She paints 3 hours a day, and that's it. That's all she has the capacity for.
Yeah.
So, and that's okay. I mean, there's plenty of other things to do that need to get done as an artist. I'd say only about maybe 40% of your time you're actually painting, compared if you're actually operating it as a business. The rest of your time you're teaching or marketing or communicating on, doing correspondence to clients, there's photo shoots, there's just a massive amount of other things that you'll be doing.
Do you find that's true whether you have gallery representation or not? Because I typically break up my time very intentionally thinking about like what is marketing and what is sales time versus what's painting time, because no one else is doing my marketing and sales for me.
Yeah.
So like, do you think that
That's
makes
a
a
good point.
difference?
Yes, it does actually. I think it most certainly makes a difference. If you're being represented by a gallery, you're still marketing a little bit because they ask you to also, because you're doing Instagram, and plus you don't want to be completely reliant on the on the gallery itself. That's honestly a kind of a recipe for disaster for you as a independent painter and sole proprietor. However, it doesn't mean it completely is eliminated, but they are taking on so much. They're also keeping you incredibly busy. You're, if they're like, hey, you got to get this solo show done, you're kind of chained to the easel to a certain degree, and so you have to be okay with even that. As like a thought, but you're not communicating with clients. They're doing that for you, and that's like a big part of it. So I just got into this like areas that I'm like trying to focus, and all of a sudden I almost lost my train of thought.
So we have another question from Lisa. Just curious, on your individual art journeys, how do you define success, or is it not really a thought?
Oh, I think that's a
Such an
dangerous thought.
I think it's such an important question, though. It will, if you, I mean, I don't know if I can just sum it up really fast right now, but I think it's such an important question to define for yourself, because it's so easy to compare yourself to other people's journeys, and so easy to get discouraged, and I mean, again, to compare yourself to others. And there's a point though where it's not relevant, and you just got to focus on your own journey. And so, you know, defining success for yourself, I mean, I think it's so key in order for you to keep doing it. I think a theme, I think, is like you need to keep going.
Exactly.
Whatever keeps you in the studio will help you improve and eventually become successful. So, yeah.
You know, well said. I try to tell people that number one, it is such a slippery slope, and you've got to be careful. And the way I tell people that you should, as far as success is concerned, there's only a few things, in my opinion, that matter, and everything else is just like, you should never hold too much in. So the biggest one, I was telling somebody recently this, is that if you wanted to like go into the comparison, you're going to be looking at, did I get into this gallery? Did I do this? Did I do that? And what you're going to find is, once you say you do get in that gallery, you're going to be like, is that it? You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, Tom Brady is stated to say, and even people who don't follow football know Tom Brady, like the greatest of all time, you know, quarterback. And he says, after winning like 7 Super Bowls, he's just like, I mean, is that it to life? Is that all? And it's like, if he's saying that, then you got to be careful, because it's so easy to compare yourself to somebody and say, this is the thing, you know, that I've got to put the bar to. My thing is that you should always just be asking, are you finding joy in what you're doing?
Yeah.
Are you at least making one person happy with your work? If you can say yes to those 2 questions, then you are successful, you know? And so now, does that mean there's still the pitfall there? Yes. Yes. It's a constant battle to make sure you don't compare yourself, because we're human, you know? The other thing that I think is good to keep in mind is, I'm like a firm believer in a lot of the things that like the Stoics say. And like, one of the things that helps you find joy and stop comparing yourself, that has helped me, is if you start thinking about, there is one day that the thing that you love the most to do will be the last day that you get to do the thing. And if you have that perspective that there will be eventually one day is the last day you'll actually be able to paint. You know, there is one of those. It's finite. All of a sudden, your joy of painting, at least for me, goes up quite significantly, you know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the other thing, you know, to consider.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. On that note, we'll take another break, and we'll be back with you in a bit. Well, Monica is. We're going to have her back every time she wants to come back. All the things.
So Kevin W. has a question. Any pros/cons for a vertical palette versus a horizontal palette?
Pro, the light is the same as it is on your easel, and it's easy to film both things.
Yep.
Con, sometimes if you're like me and you have bigger paint piles, it'll just run down your palette. Curious what you all have to add there.
No, that's very close to true on a lot of those fronts. So it most certainly makes it easy for lighting, you know, and so that's like one of the main reasons is that if I'm mixing this color here, it's going to more than likely be close to the same color there. So if it looks different, typically it just means that it's color association that's made it different. So you said all the right things.
Oh, yay. I like getting a gold star on
Yeah.
Painting from Life days.
You get a gold star. Yeah. All right.
So, what is you guys' favorite pose to paint?
I'm going to let the figure painters answer this question.
I don't know if I have a favorite. I mean, I just like it.
Yeah. I think that probably if I were to like venture, I guess some of my favorite poses that I've painted are ones that it's more of like what I look for in posing, is what I'm more thinking about. And what I'm thinking about there is something that Erica said, you know, contrapposto, which is like where your body goes in balance when you shift and lean your weight into like one leg, which is very common for us to do as we're in a resting state. So it makes it look really natural. And so our shoulders tilt in the opposite direction of our hips. And it just makes for a more interesting pose if you're doing like a standing thing. I think that also when you do it for a long time, things get old. So you're like trying to figure out ways to make it still feel fresh. And, you know, yeah, I don't know if I know that when I'm painting portraits, one that I tend to do is I love to like make sure that like their shoulders sort of facing towards me, if it's a head and shoulders, and then having a slight axis tilt in their face. Is something that I tend to look for and try to put into my work with that. But, you know, open for anyone else to comment on that.
I think it's cool whenever there's any kind of twist.
Yeah.
When you're getting that rib cage, pelvis, when they're facing different directions a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's
always really
especially
fun.
nice because I think it's like one of the harder things to hold. So I
It
feel like
is.
we don't get it, you know, as often as maybe we would like. So I have a follow-up question on this, Lois, which is, what do you like to do when you are in need or want of an idea? Like if you do feel like, oh man, am I going to do that same thing again? Like, what do you do to generate a new idea?
Ooh, I actually have an answer. Not necessarily a good answer, but it's what I do.
Yeah.
If somebody has something they do better, I'm totally going to steal it. My go-to is that I have a huge album. I have several that I save on Instagram and on Pinterest of different things that I have found super cool that inspire me that I typically forget about when I'm in the moment of going, this again, you know. And so I usually bust it out looking at all the things that it could be or that I could try, and usually pull about 3 from that and go from there. That's kind of like my go-to thing.
I actually do pretty much the exact same thing.
There you go.
Yep. I use the crap out of Pinterest.
Yeah. Pinterest is fantastic for that. You know, sometimes annoying when I'm trying to zoom in on things.
Yeah.
But it has really helped that process. What about you, Erica? You do something?
You know, Pinterest was something that I hadn't used in years, and then I recently have come back to it. And I like, there's so many floral arrangements that you can find on Pinterest that I find really beautiful and inspiring. I won't paint from them, but I will look at what combinations of flowers that they put together, different people put together. And it just kind of keeps me on the lookout for interesting things.
Mm.
Yeah, I really like using Pinterest as a way of thinking about how to reverse engineer the paintings I'm really drawn to. Like, what would they have needed to do to set this up?
Yeah.
Like, how
That's a great
important was the
question.
choice of model or the choice of costuming? Or like, how on earth did they figure out this lighting? And I think we look at it and we assume, like, oh yeah, I understand how that would work until you go to set it up yourself.
Yep.
So I really like using it for that.
Another thing to add to what you're saying is not only just looking at the costuming and the lighting and all of that, but if something has like an emotional quality to it, and it's really trying to reverse engineer what's giving it that emotional
Yeah.
quality. Is it the expression on the person's face? Is it literally the mood from the color that's creating it to have a certain feel? Is it, and just really creating it moments of investigation where you're just not kind of like looking at it blindly, but having a lot of intention behind how you're looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was, I forget if I talked about this last time, but in the like tribute to Richard Schmid, Tina Garrett was on there and she was talking about how like she saw this, I think it was a Schmid painting that she just loved, and she was like talking to Richard about it, and she was just talking about how it had this like magical quality.
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped her and he was like, nothing in this painting is magic. I don't paint with emotion. Like, look at the painting and tell me what in the drawing value, color, edges, composition is actually getting you to that place.
Yeah.
And I like that idea that like there is nothing mystical here.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we analyze these things, it always comes back to something really simple. And like at the end of the day, I think we can all draw and identify a value, and there's
Yep.
something kind of freeing about that to me.
Love that. Going back to what you were saying earlier about like, that, how important is identity in what we're trying to create, or what one of the people was saying, that when I'm doing these painting from lives, that's like my crux of like, because I'm like, I want to get the likeness, that like I don't end up doing the rest of the painting that needs to get done. I just like stay there and stay there and stay there. We're making progress, but I'm going to blame it on that I wasn't working the first
Yeah.
session.
Yeah.
That's my go-to. It's
You're just
okay.
like setting a handicap for the rest of us.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. See, done. But I remember years ago, I was at a Portrait Society and Michelle Dunaway was working on, she was doing a paint off with everybody. And in the paint off, she is like on the eye the whole time. And I was like, oh, see, now it makes me feel a lot better. And she like never moved on between like the eye and the nose, because it's hard. It's hard to like manage your time.
Will you be at Portrait Society this year?
I'm teaching at Portrait Society in faculty this year.
Shame on
Yeah.
me for not knowing that.
Oh, it's okay. Look, I'm not that important. I'm not like,
Oh my goodness.
I'm teaching. No, I'm doing. I'm teaching a workshop. There's a pre-workshop before Portrait Society starts, and it's. I'm doing one. Greg Mortenson's doing one, and Teresa Oaxaca's doing one.
Nice.
And then I'm teaching another drawing workshop during it. So the one pre-workshop is actually based off of emotion. How do you create emotional compositions and paintings, and what we use to create those things.
Ooh, now I feel very self-conscious about the answer I just gave around
Oh,
that.
no, it's not at all. But it's exciting. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I think it's full. And then I'm also doing critiques, like portfolio critiques. And I think I'm on a lecture board. I have to go back and look. So lots of things this year. So East Oaks is going to have a presence. Are you going to be there?
I will. It's my first portrait society, actually.
Well, perfect. You know, I might just have to have you as a East Oaks ambassador
Oh,
because we're going to be handing out some swag. So,
Okay.
everybody look for us. We'll have a little bit of East Oaks swag for you. And we're actually going to be doing a golden ticket opportunity to be a member, a year free subscription to East Oaks. Yeah, we're basically a sponsor for Portrait Society this year. And so we will be giving out cards with like a QR code, and it will have the opportunity to win a free subscription for a year.
Nice.
So really excited. Lots of East Oaks people will be there. I'll be there. Christian Yan will be there. Let's see. So will Alex and Divya will not be there this year. I think they have other plans. I bet you Michael and Josh will be there, who were some of the original founders. So it'll be a party. Be a good time.
We have a question from Marcella M. How long would you take to paint a portrait?
I'm going to paint a portrait in 3 hours here. But there's a better answer to that, which is if it's a commissioned Head and Shoulders, typically they take me about 2 days to 3 days. But that's like working pretty full time on it. And then there is, if I'm doing like a full body, it can take 2.5 weeks up to a month, depending on if it's got background and all the things. There's a lot of different things that it could have in it. So, so that to be said is, that there's a lot of room in there for in between of what it could be, but it just all depends on the size and subject matter, and if it's from life, if it's not from life, is there background, is there not background.
What do you, how does working from life versus not from life factor in to that timing?
Typically, if I'm working from life, it's only Head and Shoulders, but I usually will do it in two days, and they're like 3 days, and they're like 3 to 5 hour sessions, depending on if I get what I need. If I'm not working from, and they have a little bit more energy to them. If I'm not working from life, it usually means that it'll be a longer period and it'll be a more refined painting. They actually have very different feelings to them. Painting's got feelings.
Yeah.
For me, I would
feel like
say
that's
it just depends on a lot of factors. But I'll say, for example, I did a self-portrait and it took me months because I wasn't working on it necessarily all the time. And I did a lot of studies and, stuff in between, and it was just a long process. So, in other paintings, of course, in between where, I wasn't just working on this one the whole time. But if I had worked on it every day, maybe a month in order to get to a level of completeness that I was
That you were looking for.
decently satisfied with. Relatively, we're all self-critical on our work, but
Yep.
Yeah, I had a piece that similarly took me months, but because I put things on YouTube after, I had all the footage and could play back the footage from just when I was putting paint to canvas, and all things said and done, it was a 5-hour painting. And I was like, what? How on earth was it only
Yeah.
that amount of time? So yeah, sometimes the answer to that question will like really surprise me.
I mean, I think it's also possible to do like maybe a head study in a couple weeks and get to a good resolve.
Hmm.
For me, I'm slow though when it comes to people.
I'm at the tricky point where I don't want to start overworking this. This is incidentally about where I stopped last time.
No, don't stop.
I'm not going to stop. But now I have to be like really,
Well, we're almost to model
thoughtful.
break, so you should
Yeah.
like take the time to think about your next move.
yeah, like a chess match.
Yep, exactly.
Do y'all have a favorite painter who paints nothing like you? I mean, I guess that's a very subjective term.
I'm
but-
going to snap say yes, but I have to think about who it is. But I most certainly do believe I do. I do believe I do.
There's the surrealist painter Magritte, if I'm saying that correctly. I think he has some interesting stuff that I would never necessarily paint like it, but I find it really interesting to look at.
I actually think that's so healthy to have.
Yeah.
Because it might not be what you paint, but it most certainly in some degree influences you and helps you think outside the box.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually just read a book recently. I believe it's called Decoding Greatness, and it's about the process of reverse engineering and like cross-cultural or cross-genre influences on like technological breakthroughs or really great works of art. That I think talks about exactly this idea. That was really interesting, and I think it demystified a lot of things about like, oh, it just comes from your inner creative genius, or like,
Yeah.
I think that's the most damaging philosophy.
yeah,
It's like, oh, it just was magic. It just happened,
yep.
I don't think that's true at all.
I agree. I totally agree.
But yeah, there was something really interesting in there about how, like, psychologically speaking, we have this sort of threshold where we like things that are new, but only so new. And if someone shows us something that's like truly novel, we will reject it out of hand.
Yep.
But like when you can bring in those cross-genre influences, you're introducing something kind of familiar. And it tends to hit this sweet spot, and those tend to be like the new things that really take off or that people really, really love.
It's like just far enough out.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a thing called cognitive ease. Have you ever heard of this?
I have not.
Cognitive ease, I might save for the next break, seeing that we're 30 seconds away. So
Awesome.
But we'll talk about cognitive ease when we get back on the break. How about we go ahead and break early 30 seconds, and we will be back with everybody on the next time, and see you then.
It's like allegory.
I'm just going to put a little bit of the hair in here before I keep on going so that I find myself a chance to.
Kind of tying back to the last question, who are some favorite artists that inspire you from a technical standpoint?
Boy, there are just so many. It's really hard to say a single one. I mean, some of the people I love looking at is like George Clawson. Let's see. I'm like drawing a blank of anyone that's not like a cliche person. That,
I know. I think all of mine are cliches.
I mean, who doesn't like looking at Rembrandt, and some people that there are some that I'm like, oh wow, they're awesome, but they're not people that I would look at for my own work. I'm like, for example, Caravaggio is not somebody that I like looking at for the way I want to paint, but incredible painter. And then people of today, I love my buddy Michael Klein, and I think Alex is a truly exceptional painter of today. And just happy to always have him around. And how about anybody else? You can chime in. There was somebody recently I was looking at, I was like, I need to have like a list of that guy because I know that I'm going to forget his name when somebody asks me that question. And he's like, now I'm like, hey, gummit. I should have gotten him.
So someone very contemporary that I've been thinking about a lot lately is Carolyn Anderson. Just, I think her approach to edges and contours specifically, it just really, really interests me. And I try not to like fangirl too much. But like her paintings really get me thinking about a lot of my painting habits, and she has a lot of interest in the like anatomy and psychology of how our eye works that I like personally just find really stimulating.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff I love too. I love nerding out on like just how the illusion of our eyes and our brain perceives things.
I read something one time that I've yet to corroborate, but it's that like, our focal area is about the size of our thumb stretched out in front of our face, and we really don't perceive color or like hardness to edges beyond that, but our eye is so mobile that we experience color in our full visual field, which kind of blew me away, and also made me realize like, oh man, I really have to deprioritize painting from photos.
Yeah, it's definitely a big difference.
I'm trying to think of someone for this answer. I mean, to be honest, I'm in a phase right now where I'm thinking less about other painters and more about what I'm doing, and just direct engagement with the subject. More as like an exploration to how I would solve problems rather than trying to train and see how other people would do it. Now, that's not saying not to go look at other people or anything. I think it's so useful and important and everything.
It's healthy to have both.
Yeah,
for sure.
But I think for right now, I'm in a time period where I need to look at or need to engage more with how I would do something. And
yeah.
Lisa has a question. Will you continue cognitive ease?
Cognitive ease, yes. So cognitive ease is the psychological state that when we see things that are familiar, that we tend to gravitate towards them. So the reason that like Coca-Cola puts, a sign on the back of a baseball field is not because they think that all of a sudden you're going to go, oh, I want to go get Coca-Cola right now because I see the sign. It has to do with the more familiar you are to seeing something, the more prone you are to believe that it's safe. And so if you end up having a selection between Coca-Cola, Mountain Dew, and all the other ones, you're going to end up selecting Coca-Cola because your brain reacts to thinking that it's more safe than the others because it's more familiar to you.
That's
So
interesting.
I'm trying to remember what we were talking about that brought that on.
It was the idea of like we only like things that are so new, and like you bringing in these like cross genre influences.
Yeah. So, and that's basically where I was bringing that in as like the psychological comment of what that is, basically, that we want to reject the new thing. But if you're right on the edge of cognitive ease, where something is familiar enough and you can make that next step right past it, then it feels fresh and feels intriguing. So, it's kind of like all of a sudden I remember when like skinny jeans came back and everybody was like, oh, I can't believe skinny jeans are back. That's rah, rah. And then like all of a sudden, like it was a thing for like 2 months or like 6 months or a year or something. And all of a sudden everyone was like, I love skinny jeans. Skinny jeans are amazing. I hope they never go back. And so and that's all to do with we then eventually familiarize ourselves with it. And it starts to make sense to us. And, fashion is just known for this. And there's all sorts of other things. Like you can get cognitive ease from the fact that there's a famous person who starts wearing something. And well, you're familiar with that famous person. And you're like, well, what they believe, I want to believe, And so it also works in that. And that's why so many people have like celebrity spokespeople, is because they know that you will believe that person, if they say it's true, because they're familiar to you. So it's just a really cool field. Marketers have been using it for years, but they started doing actual scientific research on it not too long ago. And we're like, yeah, the science says it's real too. And it's like marketing people are like, duh, we've been using this since like the 1870s, Sometimes science just has to catch up.
Oh, so I'm curious, how do you determine the size of the pieces that are upstairs that you're working on, the big boys?
That's an interesting question. I actually, one of the ways I do it is if they're in a series, is one way. And if they're all supposed to have a similar sized child in them, so then I'll size the piece based off of the child, how big the child is, supposed to be. And the other way is that it is going to be in someone's home. And so often a big question I ask is, well, do you have a place that you're hanging this? Which will do a lot of things. It might mean color harmony, like what color harmonies I'm going to choose, things like that. And so sometimes I'll size the piece for the person's home. There's like a big painting, huge painting, one of the larger ones that I've ever done that I recently delivered. And it was based off of that exact thing. It was based off of what an actual space in a particular room in the house of a house they just had built, So color, everything was based off of that room.
Will you ever work larger than life size?
I steer away from it. And the only reason is that I tell people it's just a bit more contemporary than I am.
Yeah.
To do that. It's not as classical. I don't have any qualms with it. But I tell people that it doesn't necessarily have to be that it's, life size or not life size. What's more important to me is, does it fit the room and does it feel right for how far you are away as an observer from the painting? So if you live in a castle and it's going to be on a wall that's 60 feet tall, then you can have something that's twice the size of life and it still feel small. Yeah. And so if in that instance, yeah, totally,
We have a question from Marcella. Do you prefer to paint alla prima for portraits, or do you use fat over lean and oil out the canvas if the paint is dry?
Well, me personally, by nature, I'm a layer painter. Alla prima is most certainly not my main form. However, I believe all forms, in practicing all forms, help complement the other. So yes, I most certainly think about the fat over lean thing. But Chelsea, for example, I believe is an alla prima painter, aren't you?
I am, yes. So I work exclusively that way. Also, the question kind of made me chuckle because, like, yes, I'm an alla prima painter, but I also have to be considering fat over lean.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do come back to a painting because maybe I got tired and I didn't want to work through being tired and risk messing something up. I don't think that suddenly I'm not an alla prima painter anymore when that happens. I'm just a painter who had to take a break, so I will oil out. But it makes me think of like a funny XKCD comic from this past week that was talking about the danger of a false dichotomy. And one of the people in the comic strip said, well, we have to have false dichotomies because the only alternative is cannibalism. I just thought that was like so beautifully silly. So I wanted to comment on that because, like, yes, I'm an alla prima painter, but I do all of those things despite, typically I won't have to oil out. And typically I'm not thinking about layering per se, but I do still have to think about fat over lean, for instance.
I personally prefer to work in layers. I think there's some just really cool effects that you can do when the paint's dry, that when you paint on top of it, there's, I think, just something really cool about that. But I won't necessarily oil out. In a way, I try to avoid it, not because you can't ever do it. It's just I want to be conscious of how much oil I'm putting on the panel. Because it will yellow over time, and it's the more brittle part chemically of the oil paint is the oil itself. And so I tend to just either go directly on top without oiling it out, unless it's in the later stages of the painting. Then I might, if I have one more layer to do, then I might oil it out and paint on top of that layer, because then I can see everything and how it's harmonizing together, making sure I am doing the thing that I think that I'm doing. But that being said, I just am being conscious of how much oil I'm putting on, extra oil I'm putting onto the canvas is something I've been really thinking about recently.
It's good. Hear, hear.
Okay. I like that mark so much. And
Don't you hate when you have to get rid of a mark that you love? Yeah.
Yep. I
can get rid of every mark on mine right now.
It's there. Like the mark that I put down is on her, but it's not reading correctly. So let's see what I can do about that.
I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I have a birthmark on my lip.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can put that in now that you said
I
that.
might be able to see it from here.
Man, I think I'm gonna have to cover it up.
Do it.
I know, but I'm mad about it.
Okay. Get mad.
Mustafa commented, Hi from Egypt. Can't wait for the next session of Alex Venezia workshop on East Oak Studio.
So it's our dear friend who is our dear friend from Egypt, who is we consider him part of our East Oaks family. He's been with us since the very beginning. And yes, I can't wait too. Everybody, so you're aware, Alex Venezia is working on a live stream workshop with East Oaks Studio right now. It's been a month long. It's 1 day a week. You can watch all the recorded ones, and you can join us live for the final one coming up not too long from now. So shout out to him. Shameless plug.
Also, we have a comment from Sean Kelly Studio. Great to see Chelsea out and about. Hey from UT.
Oh my gosh, hi Sean. That's so cool.
And where's Sean from?
From Utah, I believe.
Oh, awesome. Lots of good painters out there.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of like OGs, Sean is one of my like OG followers on YouTube.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool, like being able to get to know people online that way. I'm sure you've had that
Oh, yeah.
experience too.
Yeah, it really has. YouTube, I got to hand it to just, the platform, just like a lot of things, it's like you got its good sides and its bad sides, but boy, it's been incredibly helpful to be able to reach the world. I didn't have this when I was starting to paint, and I always wished that I had. I felt like I was the only one out here painting, that I was just like doing this ancient thing that no one else was doing. And there's this whole other world of people out there. And so pretty cool.
If you could have dinner with an artist, dead or alive, who would it be?
That's a great question.
Dinner.
I think Botticelli's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder who would tell the wildest stories, but I don't know enough about art history to have a good answer to that.
And Erica, you tell us why you think Botticelli would be your choice.
I just admire his work so much, like from a design standpoint. I would just love to hear what he would say about making work. It's different from from how I work and everything, but I just love his sense of line and design, and and obviously from being in Florence.
Yep. Yeah, the Florence experience is, so incredible. Such a unique situation. Shout out to all of our Florence people, if any of them may be listening. So Erica was there when we were filming Daniela Astone, who was one of her teachers and instructors, and then fellow colleagues at the Florence Academy of Art. And Eric and I hung out a lot on that trip. And she took us to all the cool hole-in-the-wall restaurants and the places that nobody knows about, where the Italians only speak Italian. And boy, was it a blast. We had a good time.
Do you want to go back? Like, would you stay?
I lived there for about 7 years. And I would, of course, want to come back and visit. Absolutely.
Everybody's concentrating so hard
I
to
know.
like get stuff done. I'm like, I gotta fix everything. She doesn't even have eyebrows yet. Don't worry, you will. I'm working on them. Yeah, it always feels like right at the end, you're like getting into the good stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, you're like, well, I'm kind of done. And I'm just kind of sitting here painting around. I'm like, oh, I've got about 3 more days before I'm done. Mm. It's one of those things where I keep forgetting how much I enjoy using a fan brush to like abbreviate things and loosen me up a little bit. You start getting it, trying to like gain too much control, you start losing it.
Oh man.
Don't lose it.
I know. Well, there was like some nice economy of brushwork that I think I just,
Destroyed.
uh-huh. So now the question is, can I reestablish it?
We'll see if we can get there.
Okay, don't hate it.
So Erica, I see that you're like working with the hair and trying to create texture. Like walk me through your thought process and like what you're thinking of like trying to make it more texturally appealing.
Trying to get a sense of like the feel of her hair and how it would differ from somebody else's. So I like get the character of her. At the same time, I don't want to go too crazy with it. So start overseeing shapes, and I want to make sure that it reflects the structure of the skull, particularly in the highlights, in making sure that they aren't just aesthetic, but they mean something. So trying to keep that in the back of my mind as I start reining in maybe some of the movement that I added to the hair. At the same time, I want to make sure, I'll reiterate that I don't want to overdo the highlights, and sometimes if might have a tendency of not seeing them in context to the rest of the pose and skin. So they might not be as bright as I might instinctually think they are. So I have to remember to tone it down a little bit. But I do think it's an opportunity to add some more cool notes because I painted her skin tone quite warm. So I'm now looking for those balancing cool notes, and starting with the hair is a good place, given the stage of my painting.
Good answer.
I feel like I have to be so careful now.
Those final stages, especially if you're a good Alla Prima painter, I feel like that's like the spot where you can like put that wrong stroke and mess it all up.
Yeah. So I almost feel like yes, I have so much more information in here at this point, which is great. And it feels higher stakes than any other part of the process. And I don't want to kill it. I don't want to kill some of the looseness.
I've already killed it. I'm just gonna go ahead and keep on going.
I
Push
think,
it to the point of failure.
yeah, I think this is one of those points where, well, and then the question is like, can you bring it back? Which I think I did a little bit on her neck. So yay for that.
Hey,
But yeah,
no
I think
risk, no reward.
one of the hardest things I think is like when the model is still sitting there to say like, you know what, if I don't have an idea of what needs to happen next, I don't get to pick up the
Move on.
paintbrush. Yeah.
I understand that. You have 7 minutes to decide.
Oh my gosh, that's so mean. More like 7 minutes where like the Jeopardy song plays in my head.
What are some artists that inspire you compositionally?
I think my answer to this is so boring because I like love doing head and shoulders vignettes. So it's not exactly the most like nuanced area of composition. I'm curious what you all have to say instead. Not to pass the buck as you all put on the finishing touches.
Yeah, I'm almost one of those places where I'm like, somebody else.
I can't even think right now. Well, I think of before when I was saying Botticelli, like I was thinking of him because I love when a painting from far away has one impact, and then as you get closer, like kind of like a world is revealed. And so looking at how, if you look at, just an example of the birth of Venus, like, full figure, huge, like amazing in it, and you get this environment from far away, then you get up close and you look at her hair and all of those like wispy, beautiful details that you can only see when you're really up close, yet they still inform that impact from far away. Like, I find that to be just really interesting. And so he's someone I have in the back of my mind when I'm painting, because I want to be able to create that kind of idea.
All right, I made a decision and I adjusted one stroke on my signature.
Made a decision.
Yeah,
No.
I committed. We're doing big things over here.
Sorry.
We're on the home stretch here.
We have a question from Lisa. The age-old question, how do you each determine when done with a painting?
She seems to know the answer. So.
Yeah, this is one, I mean, I think there's two things. Like one, when I look at just my painting, is there anything that I feel is just distracting? Two, and sometimes I have to do this over multiple sessions. When I look at the painting compared to the model, like, and I just squint and take in the big picture, am I catching anything that's just wrong? And then once those two boxes are checked, I usually stop when I'm terrified to keep painting.
So when I'm starting a painting, I like to write down a few words or ideas at the beginning, just and make sure that at the end that those were the things that I indeed communicated. Maybe it's an expression or a feel, and of course, things can adapt as you work. I'm not setting it in stone so much, but if I want something to feel mysterious, I want to make sure at the end that idea is actually communicated. And then I think to repeat what Chelsea said about really paying attention to where your eye is going and making sure that nothing's distracting you, and if it is, like taking care of that and understanding from a big picture standpoint, how things are working with each other. I'd say those are my priorities when I'm finishing a work.
If you feel like you haven't captured that feeling or that idea, and you're at the late stages of a painting, how do you go about remedying that? That's a hard word to say. Mic'd up.
Well, it's interesting. I think this is where having, like, doing kind of multiple versions of the same idea, like, sometimes you don't know until you do it, and then you realize, next time. It might be something for next time. I can't necessarily do it all in every painting to the degree that I would like it to. So some things are I'm going to take that lesson for the next one. But ultimately, it's like, if you're that far, you can show something. And so making something that works, you can still do that. Well, that went completely away. But I like to have an idea of where the painting is going at the beginning, because then I'm not kind of circling around being like, is it finished? Is it not finished?
Yep.
Like, I don't know. I like doing studies, color studies, value studies, pencil studies, things that we learned in school that really, really, really helped. Definitely continue doing those.
All right, everybody, for better or for worse, we are done.
Go.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Monica.
Put it on that camera. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. It's so great to have Erica and Chelsea in here with us, as well as Nora behind the mic and Monica on the model stand. We appreciate all of them. Just to let you know, a few announcements. Alex still has one more on Wednesday, one more session of his workshop. If you would like to join us live, you get to ask questions while watching him paint from the model. And it's been incredible. I think it's been an unbelievable session. He's done an incredible job so far. Really excited about that last session. So, and I believe that Kelly is going to release some sort of deal on that. So if you sign up for our email blast, you'll have an opportunity for some extra something, seeing that you weren't live for the first 3 sessions. That will be kind of added to it. So look for that. And also, like we said before, I'll be at Portrait Society. We'd love to see you. Come by and say hi to me while we're there. We'll be doing at least one more painting from life before Portrait Society happens. But and all of this next time, I think the next one is next month on, I think it might be the 12th. So keep your emails open and look for that. If you haven't subscribed, please click the bell and click subscribe. We'd appreciate it. It helps us be discoverable to a lot of other people who might be interested in what we do. Thank you again. Y'all have a wonderful day. Enjoy your weekend.